Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor Gaccioni, and I'm the Metro Regional Quality Council Project Associate. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. I am white, hearing, and able-bodied. Welcome to the Metro Regional Quality Council training on cultural responsiveness. The purpose of this training is to inform and educate people about the significance of culture within our work and the best practices for navigating cultural diversity. It is vital to note that this cultural responsiveness training provides tools and knowledge to help individuals represent the values of the Metro Regional Quality Council and the ARC Minnesota. But it is not an exhaustive resource and should only be viewed as a basic framework. Before we begin talking about culture, I want to go over the objectives for this training. Our first objective is learning. Learning is a process of change based on experience that leads to the attainment of new knowledge and skills. This presentation is meant to help us learn new information or modify existing knowledge around the different components of disability and cultural responsiveness. Our second objective is understanding. Many problems can arise from misunderstandings, especially because we live in a multicultural world. The ability to understand and validate other people's culture and experiences is crucial to practicing cultural responsiveness. Our third objective is self-awareness. Increasing self-awareness is key to practicing cultural responsiveness. By becoming aware of our own bias and being provided with tools like this training to help reduce our own prejudices, it can help us begin to understand the implications they have on our interactions with others. And our last objective is to understand that cultural responsiveness is a lifelong process of increasing self-awareness, developing social skills and behaviors around diversity, and gaining the ability to empower others. So what is culture? Culture is a social system of meaning and custom that is developed by a group of people to assure its adaptation and survival. These groups are distinguished by a set of unspoken rules that shape values, beliefs, habits, patterns of thinking, behaviors, and styles of communication. Culture is like an iceberg. Icebergs are famously disproportionate in terms of visibility. You can see the top 10%, but 90% of its mass is below the surface. Culture is similar. You can observe about 10% of it, but to comprehend the rest, you have to go deeper. Understanding culture matters because people process their experiences and events of their lives through a filter. It influences people's values, actions, and expectations of themselves. It affects people's perceptions and expectations of others. Culture is important because it informs our understanding of when support is needed. It influences how and from whom we seek support. And it influences how we attempt to provide supports and services. Culture is a strong part of people's lives. It influences their views, values, humor, hopes, loyalties, and their worries and fears. Therefore, when you are working with people and building relationships with them, it helps to have some perspective and understanding of their cultures. It is important to remember how much we have in common, but at the same time, we cannot pretend our cultures and differences do not matter. We cannot gloss over differences and pretend they do not exist, wishing we all could be alike. And we cannot pretend that discrimination does not exist. It is important to be culturally informed, but we also cannot claim expertise in a cultural identity we do not hold. Now that we've covered culture, we're going to talk about the other two components that make up cultural responsiveness. They are cultural competency and cultural humility. Cultural competency is the ability of individuals and systems to respectively and effectively interact with people of all cultures, classes, races, ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, ability statuses, and faiths or religions in a manner that recognizes, affirms, and values the worth of individuals, families, tribes, and communities while protecting and preserving the dignity of each. Cultural competency is a continuous process of learning about the differences of others and integrating their unique strengths and perspectives into our lives. Understanding cultural competency matters because it helps recognize the broad dimensions of culture. It helps respect families and communities as the primary source for defining strengths, needs, and priorities. It helps increase sensitivity to alienating behaviors. It helps change decision-making processes to include families and the community. It helps make a commitment to structural and policy changes that support cultural diversity. And it helps make policies and practices fluid to accommodate necessary adjustments. The term cultural competency, or being culturally competent, can create challenges because the term competent is used. It alludes to the idea that once we do a cultural competency training, we are competent. And the reality is, it is a lifelong process. Cultural competency teaches us how we are different from each other. It is the beginning conversation we must have to start working towards cultural humility and responsiveness. Cultural humility promotes self-awareness, challenges us to learn and acknowledge our privileges, and how that affects the individuals who we work with and serve. It requires that we be open and reserve judgment of others' perspectives. Out of acceptance, we develop understanding, actively bridge cultural divides, and recognize that others have a positive worth. They matter. Cultural humility helps us appreciate who an individual is from their cultural perspective and how this shapes the lens through which they see others in the world. It helps us acknowledge that no one can know all there is to know about individuals or the world. It helps us know that the experiences of others, coworkers, and those you and we are helping requires that you and we be open and understanding of their point of view. It helps us draw on the cultural experiences and knowledge of families and individuals we work with. It helps us recognize that the cultural experiences of others can exceed our capacity to fully understand all there is to know about culture. It helps us understand that an individual's social experience affects how they see the world and how they express their culture. And lastly, it helps us develop an understanding of and respect for an individual's or family's unique culture and ethnic heritage. Cultural humility is important because it helps us examine our own privileges and biases about people who are different. It teaches us to resist labeling and classifying people. And by starting to recognize our privilege and bias, it helps us begin having conversations and analysis with ourselves, peers, and colleagues. Now that we have covered culture, cultural competency, and cultural humility, let's talk about how these three components make up cultural responsiveness. Cultural responsiveness is when services are framed by the understanding of how culture, cultural competency, and cultural humility intersect to create a culturally responsive foundation for families and communities to be engaged and supported, utilizing the strengths of their diversity and cultural dynamics. Think of cultural responsiveness as a tool to ensure the inclusion of various points of views and experiences. It often requires that those in a position of power take ownership of their role in society and the advantages that may come with it. It is important for a person in power to encourage the learning and understanding of other groups to foster respect, trust, and inclusion of that understanding in every step of decision-making. Cultural responsiveness matters because it creates a respect for differences, a willingness to accept many ways of viewing the world, and creates an eagerness to learn. Like I mentioned before, being culturally competent is not enough. Yes, we know we are different from each other, but if we operate through a culturally responsive framework, it informs more conversations around why people are different. It helps us go more in depth about why there are differences, and that informs accessibility. To end part one of the training, I want to provide you with an activity to help broaden your thoughts and ideas about culture. The purpose of the PIE exercise is to guide you to consider aspects of culture beyond race and ethnicity. All of the cultural groups that you identify with, and the importance of each group in your lives. The next slide will provide you with instructions on how to complete the activity. After completing the activity, please watch part 2 of the cultural responsiveness training.